You're just a caretaker.
You can stop pretending now, Martin. This was never your home. Kendra Hayes said it loudly enough for the buyers, the listing agent, and two neighbors on the gravel drive to hear. Behind her, a locksmith snapped his red toolbox shut. The new deadbolt gleamed in the afternoon sun. Martin stood below the porch with one hand on the rail he had sanded and sealed every spring for 19 years. A brass boat key hung from his fingers. Kendra noticed it and smiled. That won't open anything anymore. The buyers avoided Martin's eyes. The husband stared toward Lake Geneva. His wife held the purchase folder against her chest, already tabbed for signatures. Martin said nothing. At 60, Martin had learned that silence could keep a bad moment from becoming a permanent wound. Today, it felt like surrender. You maintain the place, Kendra said. That doesn't make it yours. Caretakers don't become owners because they fix gutters and mow grass. The realtor cleared her throat. Maybe this should be private. No, he needs to understand before the signing. Kendra folded her arms. I'm done letting him confuse sentiment with ownership. Martin glanced through the glass. He could see the table where he had fed Kendra's mother after her stroke, the fireplace he rebuilt, and the hallway where he slept during her final month because she feared waking alone. Kendra followed his gaze. I'll have your clothes boxed, but you are not delaying this sale. The buyer finally asked, is there a dispute over possession? There is no dispute, Kendra said. The deed is clear. Martin rubbed his thumb across the worn teeth of the key. It once opened Margaret Hayes's mahogany boat, then a lockbox beneath the dock. He kept it because Margaret had pressed it into his palm and said some promises were safer when remembered by hand. Kendra reached for it. Give me that too. It belongs with the property. Martin closed his fist. It was the first thing he had refused her all morning. A black sedan rolled into the drive. Escrow attorney Daniel Price stepped out with a leather portfolio and checked his watch. Ms. Hayes, we need to leave now if we're going to sign by 3. Kendra walked past Martin and murmured, by sunset, this house will belong to strangers. Then you'll understand how little you mattered here. She opened the car door, then called to the realtor, make sure he doesn't enter the property. That was the line that changed him, not the lock or the sale. It was her certainty that paper would protect cruelty because she had never read all of it. Martin reached inside his coat and touched a creased envelope. Daniel noticed the faded trust reference typed near its corner. What is that? He asked. Kendra answered first. Old household papers, nothing relevant. Martin met the attorney's eyes. I think you should decide that. Kendra's hand paused on the car door. Daniel crossed the gravel and held out his hand, but Martin kept the envelope. Not here, Martin said. At your office, with the buyers present. Kendra laughed too quickly. We are not turning my closing into one of your old estate planning lectures. She mocked his former career as bookkeeping for dead people. She had forgotten he spent decades reading the sentences families skipped. Daniel studied him. What exactly are you claiming? Martin faced the locked house. I'm not making a claim. He raised the envelope. I'm asking you to reopen the title escrow packet before anyone signs. The realtor lowered her phone. The buyer's wife loosened her grip on the folder. And Kendra, who had spent weeks arranging a sale she believed no one could stop, lost the color in her face. Because somewhere inside that packet was a clause she had never read. A clause tied to years of tax payments, one account statement, and the promise carried in Martin's brass key. By 3, the buyers would learn whether Kendra had the right to sell. By 4, the deed itself would be reopened. And before sunset, the woman who locked Martin out in public would discover what she stood to lose. But to understand why Martin stayed silent so long and why Margaret trusted him with more than a boat key, we have to go back 8 years to the winter. The lake froze before Thanksgiving. 8 years earlier, Martin Hayes woke before dawn to the sound of ice pressing against the dock. The lakehouse sat on the western shore of Lake Geneva, its cedar siding silver under a thin layer of frost. Inside, every pipe groaned, every floorboard carried sound, and the furnace needed coaxing before it would push warmth upstairs. Martin knew the house by those noises. I knew which window leaked during a north wind, which porch step softened after rain, and which section of roof collected snow above the guest room. Before retiring, he had spent 32 years preparing estates, correcting beneficiary forms, and explaining to families that property was rarely as simple as the name printed in bold at the top of a page. Now he spent his mornings checking medication bottles. Margaret Hayes, Kendra's mother, sat at the kitchen table wrapped in a blue wool blanket. A stroke had weakened her left side and stolen the steady handwriting she once used to manage every bill herself. Martin placed oatmeal in front of her and set out 3 pills beside a glass of water. "You put cinnamon in it?" she asked. "Enough to make it legal." Margaret smiled. "You always did hide behind legal language." He smiled back, but his eyes stayed on her hand. Some mornings, she could lift the spoon without help. Other mornings, he had to guide it. Kendra rarely saw those mornings. She lived in Chicago during the week and came north when clients' parties or photographs made the lake useful. Her visits arrived with expensive groceries, strong perfume, and plans for rooms she never cleaned. Martin never complained. He told himself Kendra was working. He told himself she struggled to watch her mother decline. He told himself enough things that silence began to feel like loyalty. After breakfast, he helped Margaret into the sunroom and checked the boiler. Then he walked to the dock with a shovel and cleared a narrow path through the snow. The old mahogany boat had already been stored for winter, but Martin still carried its brass key in his coat. Margaret had given it to him the previous summer after he repaired the engine during a storm warning. The key was too heavy for a modern ignition and worn smooth around the ring. "Why do you keep carrying that?" Kendra once asked. "Habit," Martin said. The real answer was that the key reminded him of the last afternoon Margaret had walked to the dock without assistance. She had rested one hand on his arm and said the house needed someone who understood that care was a form of ownership even when nobody applauded it. At noon, Martin opened the household ledger. The property taxes were due in 10 days. Insurance had risen again. Margaret's trust account covered part of the expense, but several withdrawals required signatures she could no longer write consistently. Kendra had promised to handle them. Instead, Martin paid the tax installment from the joint account he had maintained since selling his small estate planning practice. He entered the amount, carefully attached the receipt, and placed the account statement in a blue folder. He had done the same with roof repairs, heating bills, dock permits, and Margaret's home care equipment. It was not charity. Years earlier, while Margaret was still healthy, Martin had helped her organize a trust amendment after she refused assisted living. He had not drafted it. Professional ethics would never have allowed that, but he had explained every provision before an independent attorney prepared the final language. Margaret insisted on one condition. The lakehouse was to remain available to the family member who provided her primary in-home care and preserved the property through the end of her life. Martin never called it protection. He called it Margaret's wish. Kendra called it unnecessary paperwork. The front door opened just after 2. Cold air swept through the foyer as Kendra entered carrying shopping bags and talking into her phone. "No listed as a private preview," she said. "I don't want local people wandering through before we know what serious buyers will pay." Martin stopped in the hallway. Kendra ended the call. "What are you listing?" She removed her gloves finger by finger. Nothing yet. Behind her, a real estate brochure protruded from one of the bags. Martin pulled it free. The cover showed an aerial photograph of Lake Geneva beneath the words "Luxury Waterfront Opportunity." The address was theirs. "Kendra, Mom can't maintain this place forever. I maintain it. You know what I mean." From the sunroom, Margaret called his name. Martin placed the brochure on the entry table and went to her. Her face had tightened with worry. "She's selling," Margaret whispered. "Not today." "Promise." Martin crouched beside her chair. "I promise nobody is signing anything today." That evening, Kendra sat across from him at the kitchen table while Margaret slept upstairs. "You are spending too much from our account," she said. "I paid the property taxes, which should come from Mom's money. The trustee authorization was late. Then let it be late." Martin studied her. A tax delinquency on a valuable property was not an inconvenience. It created leverage. In his old work, he had seen families manufacture financial pressure, then claim a sale was the only responsible choice. "Did you speak to a broker before discussing this with Margaret?" Kendra leaned back. "My mother is not capable of discussing a multimillion-dollar asset. She understood enough to ask me whether you were selling her home. That is exactly why decisions cannot be left to emotion." Martin placed the tax receipt between them. "This isn't emotion." Kendra barely glanced at it. "You're her caregiver, Martin. Don't confuse that with authority." The words stayed with him long after she went upstairs. He could have opened the trust copy that night. He could have reminded Kendra of the clause she had dismissed when Margaret signed it. He could have forced the conversation into the open. Instead, he filed the receipt beside the account statement and locked the blue folder in his former office. I was still trying to protect the family from a fight. 3 weeks later, Margaret suffered a second stroke. By spring, Martin was sleeping in the hallway outside her room. By summer, he had sold most of his remaining investments to keep full-time nursing care out of the house she refused to leave. Kendra thanked him in private. In public, she told people Martin enjoyed having a purpose. Then, one rainy September morning, Martin found a business card beneath the kitchen phone. The same real estate broker. On the back, Kendra had written a date and 3 words: closing before probate. Martin slipped the card into his pocket. Outside, the brass key pressed against his leg as the wind pushed dark water against the dock. For the first time, silence no longer felt like loyalty. It felt like permission. By the following spring, everyone around Lake Geneva knew Kendra Hayes as the devoted daughter trying to make responsible decisions for an aging mother. She hosted charity lunches donated to the Shoreline Association and spoke warmly about preserving family legacy. People praised her for driving up from Chicago so often. No one saw that most of those visits lasted less than 2 hours. Kendra arrived with photographers when the lilacs bloomed and disappeared before Margaret needed help bathing. She posted pictures of the lakehouse porch, then left Martin to change sheets, refill prescriptions, and sit through the long nights when Margaret forgot where she was. Martin did not correct the story. He had spent his career watching families turn private pain into public evidence. He refused to make Margaret's illness into a weapon. That restraint made Kendra's version easier to believe. At the bank, the trust officer spoke to her first. At the hospital, nurses assumed she made the final decisions. At neighborhood meetings, people asked Martin whether he was still helping out at the Hayes place, as though he had wandered in with a toolbox instead of living there as Kendra's husband. The structure rewarded the person who spoke with confidence. Kendra understood that. One Friday afternoon, she invited real estate broker Susan Bell to the house while Margaret slept upstairs. Susan wore a cream coat and carried a tablet filled with comparable sales. "This shoreline has changed," she said. "Buyers will pay for privacy now." Kendra led her through the kitchen. Martin stood at the counter preparing Margaret's medication. Susan offered him a polite smile. "You must be the property manager." "My husband," Kendra said. She waited half a second before adding, "He handles maintenance." The correction sounded generous, but the message landed clearly. Susan began discussing staging shoreline footage and whether the old boat should remain for photographs. Martin set down the pill organizer. "Margaret has not agreed to sell." Kendra's smile thinned. "My mother is no longer capable of handling complicated transactions. That does not give you the right to pretend the trust terms do not exist." Susan stopped typing. Kendra glanced toward the staircase, then lowered her voice. "This is neither the time nor the audience. You brought the audience into her home." Susan shifted her tablet against her coat. "I can return another day." "No," Kendra said. "Martin is tired. He takes things personally." Martin almost laughed. For months, Kendra had treated every objection as fatigue, every question as sentiment, and every boundary as proof that he was no longer objective. She had turned his care into a weakness. Susan opened an online property record and rotated the screen toward them. "The current deed shows the trust as owner," she said. "If the acting trustee has authority, a sale may be possible." Kendra nodded. "Exactly." Martin noticed what Susan had not opened. The deed record showed ownership. It did not show every condition governing transfer. Those provisions lived elsewhere, and Kendra was betting nobody would ask for them until after signatures were collected. He kept his voice calm. "Before you market, this house requests the full trust certification and any recorded memoranda affecting transfer." Kendra gave a small laugh. "This is what he does. He buries simple decisions under paperwork." Susan studied Martin more carefully. "You worked in law, estate planning." "He retired," Kendra said, "years ago." The way she said it made retirement sound like erasure. Upstairs, a bell rang once. Martin left them and climbed the stairs. Margaret was awake, frightened, and trying to pull herself upright. "Strangers," she whispered. "Why are strangers downstairs?" Martin adjusted her pillows. "Kendra brought a broker." Margaret's eyes filled with anger, then exhaustion. My house. I know. No sale. I know. She reached toward the bedside drawer. Inside was a small wooden box containing the brass boat key's original leather tag stamped with the Hayes family initials. Margaret touched it, then pointed toward Martin. You keep promise. I will. Her hand closed around his wrist with surprising strength. Not just house. Martin understood. For Margaret, the lakehouse was not an investment. It was the place where she had raised Kendra, buried her husband's ashes beneath the willow tree, and spent 40 summers teaching grandchildren to swim. Selling it while she still lived there would not merely transfer property. It would tell her that dependence had canceled her voice. Downstairs, Kendra had already begun measuring the dining room. That evening, Martin drove into town to speak with the regional trust administrator. The administrator, Paul Mercer, had a framed business degree behind his desk and the impatient manner of a man who believed family disputes belonged elsewhere. Kendra is the successor trustee, Paul said. Once incapacity is certified, she has broad authority. Broad is not unlimited. Paul folded his hands. Are you contesting the medical certification? No. I'm asking whether your office reviewed the occupancy and maintenance provision. Paul searched the electronic file. After several clicks, he frowned. I see a reference to an amendment, but the scanned attachment is incomplete. Martin's pulse changed. Then request the original. That could take weeks. There may be an attempted sale before then. Paul leaned back. Mr. Hayes, your wife has represented that you are emotionally attached to the property. I'm emotionally attached to my mother-in-law staying in her home. You understand how that sounds. Martin did. It sounded personal. Kendra's position sounded financial, orderly, and efficient. Institutions often mistook those qualities for truth. Paul printed a one-page summary. Based on what we have, I see no automatic restriction against a sale. Martin read the page twice. At the bottom, beneath a missing attachment notation, was a reference number he recognized from Margaret's trust amendment. It was the first solid sign that the clause still existed somewhere outside Kendra's control. May I have a copy? Paul slid it across the desk. As her son-in-law, you have no decision-making authority here. Martin folded the page carefully. Then I'll use the authority the record gives me. Paul's expression hardened. Do not interfere with a lawful transaction. Martin rose. A lawful transaction should survive a complete file. When he returned to the lakehouse, Kendra was waiting on the porch. Susan Bell's sign rested against the wall behind her, still wrapped in plastic. You went to the trust office, Kendra said. Yes. You embarrassed me. I asked them to find a missing attachment. You are creating problems because you cannot accept change. Martin removed the business card from his pocket, the one marked closing before probate, and placed it on the porch table. Kendra stared at her own handwriting. Where did you get that? Here. She snatched it up. This proves nothing. It proves you were planning a closing while your mother was alive and unable to object. Kendra's voice dropped. Be careful, Martin. You live here because I allow it. Behind the glass door, Margaret watched from her wheelchair. Martin saw her hand resting against the pane. That was why he could not walk away. He could survive losing a house. He could not leave Margaret alone inside a system that had already decided the loudest family member must be the rightful one. Kendra carried the sign toward the driveway. By summer, this property will be sold. Martin reached into his coat and closed his fingers around the boat key. Then he unfolded Paul Mercer's summary and studied the missing reference number again. Kendra believed she had reduced him to a caretaker with no authority. She had forgotten that Martin Hayes had spent 32 years learning exactly where families buried the sentence they hoped nobody would read. Margaret died the following February before sunrise with lake ice cracking beyond the windows. Martin was beside her. Kendra arrived 40 minutes later and cried with her face against the hallway wall. For one brief moment, grief stripped away every argument between them. Martin held her, and she let him. By noon, the funeral home had called twice. By evening, Kendra had asked where Margaret kept the trust documents. Martin answered honestly. The original amendment should be with the trust administrator or the attorney who prepared it. Kendra wiped the kitchen counter, although it was already clean. And your copy, in my office. She stopped wiping. I want every document related to my mother. You can have copies after we inventory them. I'm the successor trustee, and probate has not even opened. Kendra's jaw tightened. Do not use procedure to control me while I'm grieving. Martin felt the old instinct rise, the urge to soften his answer, delay the conflict, and protect the family from another wound. Then he remembered Margaret's hand against the glass. This is exactly when procedure matters. 2 days later, Kendra changed the password on the household account. Martin discovered it while paying the heating bill. The bank representative apologized, then explained that Kendra had presented the successor trustee certification and requested sole administrative control over trust-linked payments. Our joint account is separate, Martin said. Yes, sir. But several property expenses were routed through the same online profile. Access has been temporarily restricted while ownership is reviewed. Temporarily meant the furnace payment would be late. It meant the home care invoice from Margaret's final week would bounce. It meant Kendra had found a way to make Martin look financially dependent on the property he had subsidized for years. He called Paul Mercer. Paul listened for less than a minute. Ms. Hayes has authority to secure trust assets. She has blocked access to funds belonging to me. That sounds like a marital issue. She is also preparing a sale. Has a contract been signed? Not that I have seen. Then there may be nothing for this office to address. Martin lowered his voice. You have an incomplete trust file and knowledge of a possible transaction. We have a summary stating the successor trustee has power to sell. A summary is not the instrument. Paul sighed. Mr. Hayes, I understand you used to work in this field, but you are not counsel here. It was the first dismissal. Martin wrote down the time of the call in Paul's exact words. Not as revenge, as habit. 3 days later, Susan Bell returned with a photographer. Kendra had removed Margaret's wheelchair, folded the blue blanket, and placed white flowers where her medication tray used to sit. The kitchen no longer looked like the room where a sick woman had lived. It looked ready to sell. Martin found them on the porch. You're photographing before probate. Susan's camera lowered. Kendra kept arranging a chair. We are preparing options. You told the broker there was no transfer restriction. There isn't one. You do not know that. Kendra faced Susan with an exhausted smile. This is what I warned you about. He is having trouble separating grief from reality. The photographer glanced at Martin, then away. Kendra continued, he was very attached to my mother. Caring for her became his whole identity. The words cut deeper because they contained enough truth to disguise the cruelty. Martin had built his days around Margaret's needs. After her death, the house felt unnaturally quiet. But that did not make him confused. It made him a witness. Susan tucked the camera strap beneath her arm. Perhaps we should postpone. No, Kendra said. We have a private buyer coming next week. Martin absorbed that. How far along? Kendra did not answer. Susan did. They requested a fast closing. A practical threat had become real. Martin went upstairs to his office and opened the fireproof cabinet. The blue folder was gone. He checked behind ledgers, inside desk drawers, and beneath old client binders. The account statements remained in a separate metal file, but the folder holding Margaret's tax receipts and his copy of the trust summary had disappeared. Kendra stood in the doorway, looking for something. You entered my cabinet. It is my mother's house. That was my private office. Nothing in this house is private from the trustee. Martin faced her. Where is the folder? I secured documents connected to the estate. They include records from my personal account. Then you should have kept your finances separate. She walked away before he could answer. Martin followed her to the stairs. Kendra listened carefully. If you destroy or conceal anything affecting title, she spun around. Do not threaten me in my mother's home. You told me it was yours. The sentence stopped her. For several seconds, grief and anger moved across her face so quickly Martin could not separate them. Then her voice hardened. You want honesty, fine. My mother trusted you because you made yourself indispensable. You paid bills. Nobody asked you to pay, kept records nobody wanted, and waited for her to mistake service for entitlement. Martin's hand tightened against the banister. I helped her stay here, and now you expect a reward. No, then leave. From the driveway came the soft thud of a car door. Susan had returned with a preliminary purchase proposal. Kendra took it from her and carried it into the dining room. The buyer was offering below market value in exchange for a signing within 10 days and closing before the probate hearing. Martin read only the first page before Kendra pulled it away. You have no role in this. The proposal assumes unrestricted authority to convey title. The trust owns the property. The trust may be bound by conditions. There you go again, may, might, somewhere, missing paperwork. Kendra placed the proposal against his chest. You have built your entire argument around a clause you cannot produce. That was the partial clue she thought she understood. Because Martin could not find his copy, she believed the clause had vanished. But trust provisions did not disappear simply because one household folder was removed. They left references, numbers, payment patterns, instructions copied into closing records by people who never expected those words to matter again. Martin returned to his office and examined what remained. The personal account statements showed every tax payment he had made, each one tied to the property's parcel number. The oldest statement contained a handwritten notation from Margaret's independent attorney. Advance under maintenance condition. Not enough to stop a sale. Enough to tell him where to look. He called the attorney's former office. The receptionist explained that the practice had merged years earlier, and archived files were stored off-site. How long to retrieve one, Martin asked. Usually 5 business days. The proposed signing is in 10. I can submit an urgent request, but I cannot promise anything. Submit it. Next, he drove to the county records office. A clerk named Elena Ruiz searched the parcel history, while Martin gave her the amendment reference number. There's no full amendment recorded, she said. I wouldn't expect one. Look for a memorandum title instruction or prior escrow exception. Elena searched again. A document number appeared. The file image would not open. Scanning error, she said. The original may be an archived microfilm. How quickly can it be pulled? Tomorrow afternoon, maybe Monday. Martin checked the calendar. The buyer's signing had been moved to Monday at 3. Kendra had shortened the deadline. He requested the archive retrieval, paid the fee, and asked Elena to stamp his receipt with the exact time. Before leaving, he placed the brass boat key on the counter while organizing his papers. Elena noticed the initials on its leather tag. Hayes Marina Works, she said. My grandfather used to service their boats. Martin picked it up. Margaret's husband owned the marina before the shoreline redevelopment. The old escrow company handled most of those family transfers. Which escrow company? Elena named it. The company had closed years earlier, but its active files had been absorbed by Daniel Price's firm, the same office now preparing Kendra's sale. The hidden record had not vanished. It had moved. When Martin returned to the lakehouse, a locksmith's estimate lay on the kitchen table. Kendra had circled the option for full exterior replacement. You're changing the locks after the funeral. I live here. For now. Martin folded the estimate once and placed it beside the buyer's proposal. He could leave. He had enough savings for an apartment, enough professional contacts to find legal help, and enough pride to avoid being thrown out publicly. But leaving would allow Kendra to frame his absence as surrender. It would also abandon the promise Margaret had asked him to keep. Not merely to hold the house, but to stop care from being erased the moment it became inconvenient. Martin took the account statements, the stamped archive receipt, and the old escrow reference to his car. Then he called Daniel Price's office. My name is Martin Hayes, he said. Your firm is handling the lakehouse sale. The assistant confirmed the Monday signing. I need the title, the escrow packet, preserved and reviewed before closing. Are you a party to the transaction? Martin watched Kendra through the kitchen window as she spoke to the locksmith. I am the person the missing condition was written to protect. I gave the assistant the reference number. There was a pause. Then the clicking of a keyboard stopped. Mr. Hayes, she said carefully, where did you get this number? From the part of the record everyone else decided was too old to matter. Martin ended the call. Across the yard, Kendra pointed toward the front door, already deciding which lock would be changed first. She believed the next move belonged to her. She did not know Martin had just placed the buried reference directly into the hands of the person controlling the closing. By Monday afternoon, the lake house no longer felt like a home. Every exterior lock had been replaced. The porch furniture had been staged. Margaret's framed photographs were gone, and a printed notice on the front door warned that entry was restricted to the trustee broker and authorized buyers. Martin stood below the porch while the locksmith finished packing his tools. Kendra held the new keys. You can stop pretending now, she said. This was never your home. The buyers, Susan Bell, and 2 neighbors heard her. Martin carried the brass boat key in one hand and a document envelope beneath his coat. He did not argue on the gravel. The signing was scheduled for 3, and every minute spent defending himself to spectators was a minute Kendra could use to harden the lie. Daniel Price's sedan arrived at 2:15. He stepped out holding a leather portfolio. "We need to leave," he told Kendra. "The buyer's lender has imposed a same-day deadline." Kendra descended the porch steps. "Good, then let's finish this." Martin moved between her and the car. "I requested a review of the title escrow packet." Daniel's expression tightened. "My staff found an old cross-reference, but the archived attachment has not been fully verified." "Then the signing should wait." Kendra laughed. "An unverified attachment from a closed company is not grounds to derail a sale. It may be if the current packet incorporated it." Daniel watched them both. "The closing conference will proceed. Whether signatures are accepted is a separate question." Kendra opened the rear car door. "Martin is not a party." Daniel replied, "If he is asserting a recorded interest, he may present it." The victory was small, but Kendra reacted as though he had betrayed her. "You are letting him ambush me at my own closing. I'm allowing a title objection to be heard." Kendra's voice sharpened. "He has no title objection. He has a grief resentment and a folder of household bills." Martin felt the buyers listening. She wanted him ashamed of the very records that proved he had kept Margaret safe. Susan Bell approached quietly. "Kendra, perhaps we should give Daniel time to confirm the file." "No, Kendra," faced the buyers. "You have rearranged financing, taken time off work, and acted in good faith. My husband is exploiting an administrative delay because he cannot accept that the property belongs to my family." The buyer's wife frowned. "Aren't you married?" Kendra answered without hesitation. "Not for much longer." The words landed in public clean and final. Martin had known their marriage was damaged. He had not known Kendra planned to announce its end before strangers, using humiliation as leverage to force him away from the closing. She continued before anyone could respond. "My attorney is preparing the filing. Martin will have no future claim through me, no authority under my mother's estate, and no reason to remain on this property." The brass key pressed into his palm. For an instant, he saw the last 20 years reduced to 3 labels: caretaker, obstacle, former husband. Kendra held out her hand. "Give me the boat key." "No. The boat was part of my father's property. Your mother gave it to me. She was impaired. She was walking when she gave it to me." Kendra moved closer. "Do you hear yourself? You are clinging to an old key as though it proves you belong here." Martin's voice stayed level. "It proves she trusted me with something you never considered valuable." Kendra's smile disappeared. Then she delivered the deepest cut. "My mother trusted anyone who made her feel helpless enough." Susan inhaled sharply. Even Daniel lowered his portfolio. Martin did not answer immediately. The accusation was designed to poison the entire history of his care, to turn meals, medicine, tax payments, and sleepless nights into manipulation. For the first time that day, he almost left. He could have driven away, hired an attorney, and fought later. He could have protected himself from the room and allowed the closing system to decide whether it wanted the truth. Then he remembered Margaret's final clear morning. She had asked him to open the curtains so she could see the lake. After several minutes of silence, she said, "People think care makes you smaller. It shows who can be trusted when power changes hands." Martin had promised he would not let dependence erase her choices. Walking away now would break that promise. He opened the passenger door of his truck and removed a slim black case. Inside were the account statement, the stamped county retrieval receipt, and the old trust summary with its missing attachment number. Kendra glanced at the papers. "That is what you brought, bank statements." "One statement. You paid household expenses from a marital account. That does not create ownership." "No. But it confirms performance under a condition." "There is no condition." Daniel's attention shifted. "What wording appears on the statement?" Martin handed it to him. Beside the first property tax payment was the notation written by Margaret's independent attorney. "Advance under maintenance condition." Daniel read it twice. Kendra reached for the page. He moved it beyond her hand. "This is not title proof," he said, "but it is relevant to the archived reference." Kendra's face flushed. "You told me nothing had been verified." "I said the attachment had not been fully verified." "Then stop treating his notes like evidence." Martin returned the account statement to the case. "The evidence is waiting at your office." Kendra stared at him. "What did you do?" "I asked the county to retrieve the original title instruction. I also gave Daniel's staff the escrow reference number." "You had no right." I had every right to stop a disputed transfer from being concealed by a deadline. The buyer spoke at last. Disputed transfer. Kendra spun toward him. There is no dispute. My mother's trust gives me authority to sell, Martin answered calmly. Authority to sell may depend on whether a specific condition was satisfied. Kendra pointed toward the car. We are done discussing this on the driveway. She climbed in beside Daniel. The buyers followed in their own vehicle. Susan hesitated near Martin. I did not know about the missing title instruction, she said. You knew there was a trust. I relied on the trustee certification. So did everyone. Susan's mouth tightened with regret. I'll attend the conference. At Daniel's office, the reception area overlooked the marina. A wall clock showed 2:48. The closing room had been prepared with water bottles, signature tabs, and 2 neat stacks of documents. Kendra took the chair nearest Daniel, placing herself between Martin and the buyers. Martin remained standing. Kendra tapped the table. He should not be here. Daniel sat at the head. He raised the objection. He stays until I determine whether it affects insurability. Your job is to close. My job is to ensure the buyer receives marketable title. The buyer's lender joined by speakerphone. A processor stated that the loan authorization expired at 5 and would require review if the transfer did not fund that afternoon. Pressure entered the room like another person. Kendra seized it. You hear that delay costs everyone money. Then she faced Martin in front of the buyer's broker, attorney, and lender. You have spent years convincing yourself that maintenance made you family. It did not. You were useful to my mother, and now that usefulness is over. Martin placed the black case on the table. A witness stopped writing. Susan lowered her phone. The buyer's wife studied Kendra with growing discomfort. Martin opened the case, but did not remove the statement. Not yet. I did not come here to prove I was useful, he said. Kendra leaned back. Then why are you here? To make sure your mother's instructions survive you. Her chair scraped. Daniel raised a hand. Enough. My title examiner is checking the archived records now. Kendra's phone vibrated. She read the screen, then covered it with her palm. Martin had seen only 2 words in the preview. Archive located. Kendra stood. We should sign while your examiner reviews it. If there is a problem, you can correct it later. Daniel's voice hardened. No. The lender has a deadline. No signatures will be accepted until title review is complete. Kendra began gathering the papers. Then we'll move the closing to another firm. You may engage anyone you choose, Daniel said, but this objection will follow the file. The buyers exchanged a glance. Kendra lost control of her expression. She faced Martin. You planned this. I prepared for it. You wanted to humiliate me. Martin met her anger without raising his voice. You changed the locks and brought witnesses. For several seconds, the only sound was the lender's faint static through the speaker. Then, the conference room door opened. Elena Ruiz from the county records office entered carrying a sealed archival sleeve. Beside her was Daniel's title examiner. Daniel rose. Elena placed the sleeve on the table and set a certified retrieval stamp beside it. We found the original image under the old escrow company's transfer index, she said. It was misfiled under the marina parcel. Kendra stopped breathing long enough for everyone to notice. The title examiner opened his folder, and the current title packet does incorporate that reference. Martin kept one hand beside the brass key in his pocket. The truth had not been read aloud yet, but it had arrived in the room. Kendra recovered first. A misfiled page from an old escrow company does not override my mother's trust. The title examiner, Robert Klein, placed the archive sleeve beneath the conference room light. No one has said it does. Then why are we still sitting here? Because the current title packet specifically carries this item forward as an unresolved transfer condition. Kendra gave a dismissive wave. Old title files carry all kinds of meaningless exceptions. Boat access, dock rights, shoreline surveys. Clear it to submit and proceed. Robert did not touch the signing documents. This is not a dock exception. Elena Ruiz removed the certified image from its protective sleeve. The paper was yellowed around the edges, but the type remained clear. A handwritten reference number ran across the top, the same number Martin had found on Paul Mercer's incomplete trust summary. Daniel Price read the first paragraph silently. His expression changed before anyone else understood why. Kendra saw it. What? Daniel raised his eyes. This title instruction was issued when Margaret transferred the lakehouse into her trust. I know when she created the trust. Then you should know the transfer was not unconditional. Kendra's chair scraped against the floor. My trustee certification gives me full power to sell. It gives you power, subject to the trust's controlling provisions and any conditions incorporated into the chain of title. There are no controlling provisions relevant to Martin. Martin remained beside the table. Kendra was still arguing with the clue because she believed the real issue was his marriage to her. She had not yet understood that Margaret's instruction did not depend on their marriage surviving. Robert pointed to the final paragraph. The original escrow company was directed to retain notice of a continuing occupancy and preservation condition. The buyer leaned forward. For whom? Robert answered carefully. For the person who provided Margaret Hayes's primary in-home care and maintained the property through the end of her life. Kendra laughed once. It sounded brittle. That could mean anyone, a nurse, a housekeeper. Daniel continued reading. The beneficiary is not identified by name in this instruction. It refers to a certification process in the trust amendment. Kendra seized on that. Exactly, no name, no ownership interest. Martin opened the black case. The name comes later. He placed the title escrow packet in front of Daniel. Not merely the archived image, but the current packet Daniel's staff had assembled for the sale. A red tab marked the incorporated reference. Behind it was a copy of the old instruction, a title exception carried forward through 2 refinancing reviews and a blank certification page that should have been completed before any transfer. Kendra stared at the pages. You already had this, no, Martin said. Daniel's office reconstructed it after I gave them the reference number. Daniel nodded. The archived record reopened the deed review. Once it was matched to this packet, we were required to examine whether the condition had been satisfied or released. Released by whom? Margaret while competent or the protected caregiver after her death? Kendra's gaze snapped toward Martin. I is not a beneficiary. Martin did not respond. Robert slid the certification page into the center of the table. The trust amendment defines the protected caregiver by performance. It requires continuous primary care payment or supervision of essential property expenses and preservation of the residence until the settler's death. Kendra folded her arms. And where is this miraculous proof of performance? Martin removed one document from the black case. The account statement. He placed it beside the title escrow packet. Kendra's mouth tightened. I already explained those payments. They came from marital funds. Martin pointed to the account header. My retirement account was never joint. She reached for the statement, but Daniel took it first. The pages showed years of scheduled property tax payments, insurance premiums, furnace repairs, dock permits, and the emergency maintenance charges. Each payment carried the lakehouse parcel number. Beside the first tax advance was the attorney's handwritten notation. Advance under maintenance condition. Daniel examined the remaining entries. They continue through the month Margaret died. Martin nodded. I paid the final tax installment 6 days before her second stroke. After that, I supervised every payment even when the trust account was delayed. Kendra's voice rose. You chose to do that. Yes. That does not mean my mother gave you her house. No, Martin said. It means I performed the condition she created. The room understood before Kendra did. The buyer's wife released the purchase folder. Susan Bell stopped writing entirely. Even the lender's processor still connected by speakerphone. Asked Daniel whether the collateral was now considered unmarketable. Pending resolution, Daniel said yes. Kendra stared at him. You cannot freeze a multi-million-dollar sale because my husband paid some bills. The sale is frozen because the title packet shows an unresolved beneficial interest. Has no deed. The deed was reopened for review when the incorporated instruction was located. Kendra pressed both palms against the table. Then, release the interest. I am trustee. You cannot release another beneficiary's interest for your own transaction. I is not a beneficiary. Martin reached into his coat. When he placed the brass boat key on the table, Kendra nearly smiled. This again. Martin turned the leather tag over. The faded Hayes initials appeared on one side. On the other was a number. Robert compared it with the escrow instruction. The numbers matched. Elena spoke quietly. The old marina parcel was used as the indexing reference. That is why the instruction was misfiled. The key had never been legal proof by itself. It was something simpler and more personal. the object Margaret used to connect the promise she made inside her home to the record stored outside it. Martin slid it toward Daniel. Margaret told me the promise was safer if I could remember it by hand. I thought she meant the boat. Daniel examined the matching number. She meant the escrow file. Kendra's face tightened. My mother was sentimental. That proves nothing about her capacity. Martin met her eyes. She established the condition 4 years before her first stroke. Robert confirmed it. The execution date predates every incapacity certification in the trust file. Kendra pushed her chair away. This is absurd, Martin advised her. I explained the effect of different estate planning structures, Martin said. An independent attorney drafted the amendment. I was not present when she signed. Daniel tapped the title packet. The attorney's certification confirms that. Margaret received independent representation, and the caregiver condition was her instruction. Kendra began walking toward the door. We are going to another closing firm. Daniel's voice stopped her. The title objection has already been entered. Any licensed title company reviewing this parcel will see it. She faced the buyers. We can resolve this after closing. The buyer stood. No, Kendra blinked. He placed the unsigned purchase agreement into his folder. We were told the property could be conveyed without dispute. That was not true. It is a family disagreement. It is a title problem. Susan Bell lowered her head. Kendra turned on her. Tell them this is routine. Susan chose her words carefully. I cannot describe it as routine. The listing information represented unrestricted trustee authority. That representation now requires review. You work for me. I also have disclosure obligations. Kendra's control of the room was gone. She reached for the packet. Daniel covered it with one hand. This remains part of the closing file. I am the trustee. Those are trust documents. They are title documents connected to a suspended transaction. Kendra's voice broke into anger. You all believe him because he knows how to make ordinary paperwork sound important. Martin picked up neither the key nor the account statement. He let them remain where everyone could see them. Paperwork is important when someone uses authority to silence the person it protects. She pointed at him. You want the house, say it. Martin's answer came without hesitation. I want the record followed. You expect me to let you live there indefinitely? No. Kendra seemed confused by that. Martin faced Daniel. I am requesting a formal determination of the caregiver condition. A freeze on any transfer until that review is complete and preservation of the property expenses already documented. Daniel nodded. That is the correct procedure. Martin continued. If the condition is confirmed, I will not use it to remove the family from the lakehouse or sell it for myself. Kendra stared at him. Then what do you want? The purpose, Margaret described. He rested 2 fingers beside the brass key. A place where family caregivers can stay, recover, and receive help before care destroys their health or their finances. Susan lifted her eyes. Martin spoke with the calm certainty Kendra had tried to shame out of him. The house remains protected. I retain the occupancy and management interest Margaret created. Any eventual transfer must preserve that purpose. Daniel, read the final instruction again. The amendment permits conversion to a caregiver retreat after the settler's death, subject to beneficiary certification and trust review. Martin nodded. That is what she asked me to protect. Kendra sank into her chair. She had expected him to demand ownership money or punishment. Those were motives she could attack. He had brought the record forward to preserve the responsibility she had mocked. Daniel closed the unsigned sale documents. This closing is canceled. The purchase funds will not be released. I will notify the title insurer and trustee administrator that a formal beneficial interest review is required. The lender disconnected. The buyers left with Susan, who paused long enough to tell Martin she would provide a written account of Kendra's representations. Elena returned the certified image to its sleeve. Robert began marking the packet with hold notices. Kendra remained at the table. What happens to me? She asked. Daniel's tone stayed professional. You remain successor trustee for now, but your attempt to transfer the property without resolving a recorded condition will be reported to the trust administrator. The administrator may seek independent counsel, restrict your authority over the lakehouse, or petition for removal. I did not know. Martin finally lifted the boat key. You were told there was a missing condition. That is not the same as knowing. No, he said, it is the moment you were supposed to stop. Kendra had no answer. The immediate consequence was not handcuffs, a dramatic confession, or instant ruin. It was a frozen contract. Unopened review, a written record showing that she had been warned and proceeded anyway. For a woman who relied on certainty, it was enough to take control from her hands. Martin placed the account statement back inside the case. Daniel retained the title packet, now reopened as the central evidence in the trust review. At 3:47, Martin walked out of the escrow office with the brass key in his pocket. The lake house was still locked. His marriage was still broken. Margaret was still gone. But the sale had stopped before a buyer signed, and her instructions were no longer buried beneath an incomplete scan. For the first time since her death, the truth was not something Martin carried alone. The locks stayed on the lake house for 11 more days. Martin did not force his way inside. He rented a room above a small pharmacy in town, wore the same 2 jackets, and spent each morning answering questions from the trust administrator's independent counsel. The review was a procedural, not dramatic. Daniel Price preserved the closing file. Susan Bell submitted a written statement confirming that Kendra had marketed the property as unrestricted, despite repeated questions about the trust. Elena Ruiz certified the archive title instruction and its connection to the marina parcel. Martin provided one account statement. It was enough. The statement did not prove every hour he had spent caring for Margaret. It did not show the nights he slept outside her room or the meals he fed her when her hands would not cooperate. But it showed continuous payment of essential property expenses under the same maintenance condition referenced in the title escrow packet. The central proof established the promise. The account confirmed Martin had kept it. 3 weeks after the canceled closing, the trust administrator issued an interim determination recognizing Martin as the protected caregiver under Margaret's amendment. The lake house could not be sold. Kendra's authority over the property was suspended pending a formal trustee review. She retained access to other estate matters, but an independent fiduciary was appointed to oversee the house, its expenses, and the proposed conversion. No judge declared her evil. No one marched her through town. The consequence was quieter and more realistic. She lost control over the one transaction she believed her title allowed her to command. She also lost the benefit of being believed without question. The Shoreline Association removed the lake house from its private sale notice. The broker corrected the listing record. The buyers recovered their deposit and moved on. Kendra filed for divorce the following month. Her attorney initially demanded that Martin waive any interest connected to the trust. Daniel responded that Margaret's caregiver provision existed independently of the marriage. The demand disappeared from the next draft. Martin signed the divorce papers at the same kitchen table where Kendra once told him that caretakers did not become owners. He did not ask for revenge. He asked for his personal records reimbursement of verified non-trust expenses and a written boundary preventing Kendra from interfering with the caregiver program. She signed after 2 weeks of negotiation. Before leaving, Kendra stood near the empty sunroom. "You made me look cruel," she said. Martin closed the document folder. "I did not describe you. You brought everyone into it. You brought buyers to the house before your mother's wishes were resolved." Kendra stared toward the lake. "She was my mother." "Yes, you act like you knew her better." "No," Martin said. "I listened when she had less power." Kendra pressed her lips together. For a moment, she seemed ready to fight again. Instead, she asked, did she really plan the retreat? She wanted caregivers to have somewhere they were not treated like background furniture. A chair creaked beneath Kendra's hand. "She never told me. You left the room whenever she talked about needing help." The sentence landed without anger. That made it harder to dismiss. Kendra walked out through the front door. She did not apologize, and Martin did not chase one. Some families heal through forgiveness. Others begin healing when one person stops demanding that truth be softened for comfort. 6 months later, the lake house reopened as the Margaret Hayes Caregiver Retreat. The changes were modest. The upstairs bedrooms received safer railings and wider doorways. The old study became a counseling room. A local, nonprofit scheduled respite weekends for people caring for spouses, parents, and adult children with long-term illnesses. Martin did not become wealthy. He served as the property's resident director and received a reasonable salary approved by the independent fiduciary. His documented expenses were repaid over time, and he kept the right to live in the small caretaker apartment above the garage. It was enough. His dignity returned through useful work, stable housing, and the knowledge that Margaret's final instructions had not been erased. On the first retreat weekend, 4 caregivers arrived, carrying the same exhausted expression Martin recognized from his own reflection. One woman had cared for her husband for 9 years. Another had not slept through the night since her father's diagnosis. They apologized for resting. They thanked Martin for coffee they could have poured themselves. By Saturday evening, they sat on the porch without explaining why they were tired. Martin understood that silence, too. It was no longer the silence of surrender. It was the relief of not having to defend one's devotion. Near sunset, he walked down to the dock. The mahogany boat had been sold years earlier to cover Margaret's medical expenses, but the water still carried the same bronze light across the lake. Martin removed the brass boat key from his pocket. The key no longer opened a boat, a lockbox, or the new deadbolts Kendra had installed. It had already opened the only thing that mattered: a buried record. He considered placing it in a display case inside the retreat. Instead, he attached it to the ring holding the house key and returned both to his pocket. Promises did not belong behind glass. They belonged with the people still responsible for keeping them. A woman from the retreat called from the porch. "Martin, are you coming in?" He faced the lakehouse. Warm light filled the windows. Someone had opened Margaret's old blue blanket across the back of a chair. The building no longer looked staged for buyers or preserved as a monument. It looked lived in. "I'm coming," he said. He climbed the porch steps and unlocked the door. The house was not his because he had defeated Kendra. It remained with him because care, when freely given and honestly recorded, could not be dismissed as weakness simply because cruelty spoke with more confidence. And perhaps that was Margaret's real legacy. Family was not the person with the loudest claim, the strongest title, or the quickest signature. Family was the person who stayed when love became work. What would you have done in Martin's place? Walked away to protect your peace, or fought to preserve the promise? Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories about quiet, courage, hidden truth, and dignity restored.